And we're live. Hello, everybody. I'm Big Loaf, the guy that wears a bread mask and talks about fantasy football, as I'm sure you're all aware of. I thank you guys for coming. We have a fun show today. I brought Adam. I might butcher your last name, brother Scherer. I think
Better
that's
than
how
most
you
people.
say it. All right, here we go. Boom. All right, I'm happy. We're off to a good start. Adam's a DFS pro, VP at Run the Sims Edge Game. Adam, I'll let you talk more about that in a little bit. But Adam's someone that I've been following for a long time. If you listen to some of these shows or seen me tweet, you've heard me talk about playing DFS under my mom's name as a 15-year-old. And Adam was definitely one of the first people I stumbled onto while doing that. So like it's an honor to have you here, brother. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. Always enjoy doing shows like this.
Adam's very excited to talk about himself, as most people are, and that's what I'm here to do, like to give him the platform to do that. But I don't want to do the thing where we let people just trickle in, so we'll just get into it. Adam, in your bio, you used to have, I believe, you correct me if I'm wrong, law school dropout. That is correct, right?
Yeah, went to law school for a good one semester and then quit that to do this.
Okay, then that's perfect segue for this one. So you did quit law school to become a full-time like DFS gambler, poker player, all of the above.
Yeah, had played online poker in undergrad, and like I wasn't big, but like I started to have success basically right before Black Friday. So like I had that goal of playing poker full time and was well on my way to dropping out of undergrad when Black Friday hit. And then I like kind of dabbled around with DFS and started having success my first semester in law school. And then it was just kind of like, I just like couldn't get out of my head. Like I want to give this a try. And I was fully aware that it was going to really affect how much effort I put into law school in the second semester because, it was just, I really wanted to focus on this. So they gave me like a 1-year leave of absence. I could keep my scholarship if I wanted to come back. So it was kind of no real risk. And then took off and didn't go back.
So, like, obviously, for you to be willing to quit law school, unless you're, lazy, which maybe you are, I don't know. You obviously have to be willing to have an edge or have an edge in general. So, like, what made you realize that, like, holy shit, like, I can probably do this full time opposed to being a lawyer?
Massive naivety, if that's the word. Just being an absolute fucking idiot and having no idea what I was doing or talking about. I had a good first. I did well at DFS, like my first semester at law school, and I mean, I think I probably had like I don't know 20 or 30K or something when I decided to give it a try. And then the first week after I quit, I won my first 100K tournament. And so like in my head, I'm just like, oh, this is, easy. And like that was such a blessing because I blew through that money so fast and like had no idea of kind of like how swings go and how to manage bankroll. I still don't know that. But so yeah, I mean, it was basically like it was a very low opportunity cost thing to do. Like if I stay in law school, I didn't have a full ride. Like I had a scholarship, but like I'm still paying to go to school. My grades first semester were fine, but they weren't like top of the class or anything. So there's no guarantee that like I'm landing the 200K a year job out of law school. There's no
350K in today's money.
Right. Yeah. There's no guarantee that I'm landing like a great summer internship or anything like that. And like I said, I could go back and keep the scholarship I had. So it was kind of just why not give it a try? And like I had success at it. I thought that there were certainly angles that people weren't very good at. Like back then, I mean, this was before Fantasy Cruncher. It might have existed. This was like late 2015, beginning of 2016. So I think Fantasy Cruncher probably existed, but it hadn't been like fully adopted. Like I wasn't using it. I was building by hand. But I thought, back then, just kind of understanding game theory was an edge, I think. And I was an econ major in undergrad. I did, at least have some background in econometrics and game theory and stuff like that. Not that, I was perfect at it, but I at least understood it and could apply it. So like back then I kind of just thought that was the edge of, the edge was kind of just like not being afraid to be wrong and just kind of, being willing to, if, this is before even like industry ownership projections, but like, everybody's going to play John Wall tonight and Damian Lillard's the same price, like just click Damian Lillard a bunch and see what happens. Like that was kind of the advantage back then.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. For the reason I wanted to have you on outside of like, the respect and following you for so long is that I have learned that a lot of people from best ball didn't come from the DFS background. They found best ball on their own through however way they did it, but not because they were already in DFS. So on like the game theory tip, could you kind of give like a beginner's guide 101 to like what that means to you? Like what is like, why are you clicking Damian Lillard over John Wall?
Yeah, kind of just understanding payoffs relative to risk. Like it's understanding risk reward basically. And I mean, this comes up a lot in best ball too. Like it's much harder to quantify in best ball because everybody for the most part is 100% owned. So even if like you get your 8th round pick right in best ball, by the time you get to the playoffs, that player is going to be really popular because they had a good year. So like it's a lot harder in best ball from that angle. But in DFS, it really is just, in that John Wall, Damian Lillard example, if John Wall, his median outcome is 3 fantasy points higher than Damian Lillard's, but 60% of the field is going to click John Wall and 2% of the field is going to click Damian Lillard. Yeah, I'm going to be wrong, quote unquote, more often by clicking Lillard. But when I'm right on Lillard, I'm just getting paid all of the money. Whereas if I click Wall and I'm quote unquote right, I'm still having to find other ways to beat that 60%. So it's really just kind of understanding like risk reward and payoffs and the idea of getting paid when you're right being the goal as opposed to being right as often as you can.
Yeah, applying the GPP logic to best ball is harder because like you said, there's no real way to like, try to gain leverage. Like if someone could tell me how I could drag low advance rate players to the playoff pods, I'd be more than happy to hear it. That's what I've been caught up on. But outside of that in best ball, like where it differs is it's not a one-day slate. It's a, month-long slate, and the variance is just all over the place. There's not a lot in your control, right, which is something I miss about the DFS streets, but I also don't miss the time commitment that the DF streets gave me.
Well, and ownership in best ball is just so different because like to try and like make it analogous to DFS, it would be like in that Damian Lillard, John Wall example, John Wall is 60%, Damian Lillard's 2%. But oh, by the way, if Damian Lillard has more points than John Wall through the third quarter, everybody gets the option to switch to Damian Lillard that has John Wall. It's kind of like how best ball works, because when you get paid in best ball is the playoffs, and the only teams in the playoffs are the ones that did well. So like, the ownership in the playoffs on the best players is just always going to be high. Like the only thing you can really do about it, and I talked about this a little bit with Neil yesterday, and I talked about it in a video over at Endgame. Like if you can find truly unique combinations, which I think generally you're going to be able to do with like your first couple of picks, I think that's really the only angle outside of the 20th round guys that are less than 100% owned, or 18th round, whatever.
Shout out John Mechie.
Yeah, exactly. That worked out great. Outside of those guys, like, it's really difficult in best ball to play that kind of angle.
Yeah, no, I definitely am with agreement on you on that. So, you kind of gave background on like why you dropped out of, law school to start playing DFS. And I assume like when you started that, like you were just coming into it to play it and not make content and everything around it, because that wasn't as big back like, 10 years ago, 2015, 2016. I want to say is when this timeline ends up for you. So what is the, oh, great. Here I go. I'm blanking on, I got too many things in front of my face right now. Hold on. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. I let Adam know before the show that like, I'm like 10 reps into this and I'm not, I'm far from a professional yet. But how did you go from like, wanting to quit to play to getting into the industry and like, making content and like making money through other avenues from DFS that weren't exactly just, playing it?
Yeah. So, I mean, like it had kind of been on my radar already just because like Roto Grinders back then, I didn't watch like a ton of content. I've never been somebody that watches a lot of content because I feel like it just kind of gets in my head and I get influenced too easily. But I did like back then, Roto Grinders had Draft Cheat, Jeff El Jefe. Like those were guys that that thought very, very similarly to me, and that I felt like I got a lot from watching. So like there was a part of me that, was just like, oh, well, if I have success, I can probably do some work for like roto grinders or whatever. But then also just pretty quickly, I realized that I'm not somebody that's like very risk averse, but I do dislike, and I figured it out pretty quickly, only having DFS income. It was just really stressful. Like I said, I went through after winning immediately. I went through a pretty big downswing. I mean, I was playing like $1,000 buy-in, winner take all NBA qualifiers, like just absolutely stupid stuff. Just blowing money quickly. So I figured out pretty quickly that like, okay, it would be nice to have some sort of stable income. And then it just ended up working out really, really well that a bunch of guys were leaving Roto Grinders and starting their own company called FanVice. And they asked me to be part of that. So it worked out really well. Like, it's not even like I had to really seek out doing content. I was at the FanDuel final at the Playboy Mansion, and somebody just came up to me and was like, "Hey, we're starting this company. Do you want to be part of it?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure."
There's worse stories than starting a business, and the place where it started is the Playboy Mansion.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I definitely like that lore. And like on the lore side, like you say, like El Jefe and Draft Cheat, and like I know who that is, but like again, like I was saying earlier, I've learned that a lot of people that play best ball, they don't know the lore behind how the industry got to where it was today, which I think is really important because like I did watch you guys like in a sense like growing up. Thank you, Mom, for letting me like grow up to be a degenerate. I really appreciate that, but I want some respect to to be had there because DFS. We've talked about this before. Maybe not like losing popularity, but like the user base is probably what it is.
Yeah.
At this point, so like I don't want that to get lost to time. So like, is there any like DFS history lore that like stands out to you that you don't want to get lost to time? Like I bet most people here don't know what Ethan Gate is. Condia's crazy story that he had.
Yeah, that all stuff almost like predates me. Unfortunately, like I wasn't like on Draft Street and stuff, which was back before DraftKings and I think FanDuel. Like I didn't play, I don't think, in like the FanDuel chat days when you had like I guess Tommy G being a maniac. But yeah, so like that stuff all kind of like predates me. Like I remember Ethan Gate. That was within my first year of playing seriously. But and you also, I was kind of thinking about it the other day, I guess, with like the new tax bill and how that's going to affect gambling, and then California's AG, giving his opinion that it's illegal. Like, I didn't realize. I guess it was 2016, like it was that long ago that like the New York AG said that he thought fantasy sports were illegal, and it ended up being a benefit because then they just codified it and made it explicitly legal. But like that was, a whole other thing, like a whole timeline that I'd forgotten about, where it was just like there's this booming industry. And at that time, you're only like 5 years removed from Black Friday in poker, where you just woke up one day and you couldn't play poker anymore. And then you're going through like the same thing again in DFS, where it's just like, oh, am I going to, wake up tomorrow and just nobody's allowed to do this anymore? And that whole idea is, ruined for a second time. So like, that's something that I think people probably don't like appreciate if they didn't go through it. But yeah, like the Condia story is crazy. I only know about it though from basically hearing about it. Like I don't.
Same.
Condia was kind of before me. Like he was I think wrapping things up. Sahil Sood, Max Delory was in his prime, I guess, when I started. I think I remember hearing that he was like living in Rajon Rondo's former penthouse in Boston. And that was just one of those things that like in my head, as again, a very naive person going into this, I'm just like imagining like all the glory that comes with being a fantasy sports player. Knowing that like Sahil's living in this like Boston penthouse. So like, yeah, I mean, he was, that was crazy back then. And I get like, I started playing, I guess, before you had like 150 max limits, which I wasn't max entering back then. I didn't have the tools or capability to do it anyway. But I guess like a lot of the legislation and stuff, changed. But yeah, I kind of came in at a weird point. Like I missed the early days where you could just like really print money, I guess. But still obviously got in at a better time than like right now.
Speaking of, were you around at all for like before they made it the 150 max? Is our man Jake here, Versatile on Twitter, who I think we're both familiar with. He was telling me some lore that he credits himself for getting that down from like there used to be no max, correct? Right. Like were you in the industry like when that was going on?
Yeah, I was playing, but I think it was like I want to say that the 150 max came in probably like 2016-ish. So I'd only been playing for like a year, and it didn't. I mean, it obviously affected me, but like at the time, I was only playing 20 lineups or whatever. I was building by hand. I was basically like my approach back then was basically to try and figure out what I thought the best lineup was, and then just like by hand make like 2-man pivots around like a core of players basically. And when it hit, I would just have a bunch of teams at the top. I'm not a computer programmer or anything, so like I didn't have the means to get a ton of lineups in. They didn't even, I mean, there was a period where they didn't have like a CSV upload. That was actually a big thing when DraftKings put that on the page. It used to be like to upload your lineups, you had to basically have build your own like upload tool. So it was something that like, it obviously impacted me in that Sahil playing 150 lineups instead of 15,000 is good for me. But it didn't impact me in terms of like changing how I play or anything like that. So it didn't feel like as big a deal.
And then like what you're describing to me, it sounds like like the golden age, maybe that was a little before you and it was a print fest, but the content golden age I definitely think you came into. And so like like they just put the CSV upload out there, like there was a lot of real estate to be had. So like what was that like in the industry back then, with like everyone kind of knowing that like, hey, like there's a lot of potential here, but also with the legal side of it looming over, it's just like did that like take anybody out from like being willing to go all in a sense?
I mean, I don't know, probably. Like I think about it, the more options you have, like the less likely you're going to go this route anyway. So, and that's even more true when you have uncertainty around stuff. It's obviously a risky decision if everything is completely clear legally. If you're somebody that is making $350K a year in finance, like you're not going to play DFS as a job probably. But obviously, like the murkier that the legality is and the more likely it is that this just like ceases to exist, then that bar becomes even lower, where like, yeah, no, I'm going to keep my 100K a year job because I don't want to quit that and then not have an industry in 2 weeks. So like, I'm sure it did keep some people out or keep some people from like committing to it as heavily as they would, just because it increased the risk on an already very risky activity.
Yeah, there's no guarantee that you're going to win money. If there's anyone watching or make money, even any takeaway someone has from watching this from Adam, a DFS pro and somebody that I would firmly believe would beat my ass up and down the block if we entered 150 lineups in the same tournament for 30 straight days, is that you making money is not a guarantee, and like that's something that you need to keep in mind. But on those like the prime, like what I'll just refer to that, the prime DFS days, something today that I notice a lot is there seems to be a lot of like loyalty to the platforms rather than maybe like the content itself. And then was that something that was prevalent back then, like were people like, no, like DraftKings is amazing, why aren't you playing here, like they do everything great? Or was it more so like user base versus like the, to put it bluntly, the evil gambling corporation that is making more people homeless every day?
Yeah, I don't really remember. Like the only thing I guess I can kind of think about, because for as long as I can remember, like the difference in customer service between DraftKings and FanDuel has been night and day. So for as long as I can remember, like it's kind of just been a meme where like to hate on FanDuel's customer service because it's non-existent and it's an absolute joke. And then like DraftKings, your mileage may vary. Like I know some people, have different experiences, but for the most, like I've never had an issue whatsoever with DraftKings. They've gone above and beyond whenever I need anything. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. So like there's that where I think people kind of have not loyalty to DraftKings, but like I'm going to give DraftKings a lot more leeway because they take care of me and generally they do a good job whenever I have problems. Whereas, FanDuel, like I've literally had the FanDuel site crash and me not be able to upload $7,500 worth of lineups. And I tell them their site crashed and they say, oh, well, you should try and get your lineups in earlier next time. Sorry. So like, there's obviously going to be more, not loyalty, but like just give DraftKings more benefit of the doubt. I don't remember a time though where like there was really players like standing up for DraftKings or anything like that. It's always still been like, yeah, like DraftKings raises rake and everybody gets mad about it. There's no DraftKings raised rake and people are out there saying, well, actually it's good and you should still love it. Like it's never been that or anything.
It seemed like my opinion, like, underdog's going to have to raise the rake for like, me to see if this take is correct or not. But like, I think at this point in the industry, there honestly, if underdog raised the rake, I think people would say it's the right thing to do, which to me is insane that someone would stick up for that. In the same way it would be insane to like, stick up for FanDuel. If
Right.
like, you try to upload $7,500 worth of lineups and like, again, I watched all this as like a kid. And like, that's a big difference that I think I notice now is this like, why is everyone so defensive of the platforms? The way I remember it being was like, like the boys being you guys would go head to head in like a capitalistic sense of like, hey, who's ever better gets to like win and own the market share. Whereas now it feels like a lot more of like a content game. It's like, it doesn't matter if the content that like the actual information isn't in it is good. All that matters now is like the entertainment value side of things rather than trying to be sharp. And I think that's changed the industry a lot, at least over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the two differences that I kind of would guess between like best ball and DFS is one, like Underdog is sponsoring a much higher percentage of the content, I think, which actually, I don't know, that might not be true. Like DraftKings, especially back in the day, like sponsored a lot of content. Like I know RotoGrinders made
Underdog was willing to give my dumb ass a partnership like 8 months ago. I think your statement's right. We don't know if it is or not, but I think you're correct.
But like back in the day, DraftKings, I mean, like RotoGrinders made a ton of money off of basically every player that signed up for DraftKings had a promo code through RotoGrinders, and they were just printing money off of those guys. So like you did have that, and people aren't going to go on shows and like trash DraftKings when they are sponsoring the show, obviously. But I do think that there's still probably a bigger, like, when you tie it all together, because you and I were kind of talking about it before the show too. Like obviously people make money at best ball, at the very least, in a given year. But I'm sure some people do have an actual expectation of making money outside of the content. But I think that for the most part, if you're somebody that's like heavily into best ball, you realize that a lot of your monetary value is actually coming from the content that you're creating, and that goes hand in hand with supporting, in this case, like using Underdog as an example. Whereas in DFS, it was a lot more like, no, like I have an actual expectation of making money playing this game this year, and every little change that DraftKings makes that affects my bottom line is a really big deal. Whereas if Underdog raises their rake a little bit, and I am somebody who makes money playing best ball, like, but also makes money off of content that's sponsored by Underdog, in the grand scheme of things, like, I don't really care that Underdog, as long as Underdog continues to put out a good product and make it fun and innovate and everything, it's worth it to me for Underdog to maybe raise the rake a little bit, as long as it leads, continues to lead to innovation and stuff like that, because I know that I'm making a lot of money off of content and I need people to be interested in Underdog, etc. Whereas with DFS, it was never really like that. It was, no, I don't really care if you're adding an extra game, like an extra type of contest, and that's why you're raising rake. Like, leave the rake alone, don't make that second contest, and let me keep printing money at DFS. So it's kind of like a different way, a different environment, I guess.
Yeah, so like, like I know you're not a big best ball guy, which is also part of the reason that I was excited to have you on here. But like me, who is, I've been advocating for the cheaper contest a lot. And the DFS days, they tell you like, oh, if I could enter 150 lineups, I would win too. And what we both know, that's obviously not true. But whereas the difference with best ball is, and it's like we were talking about before the show, like you're much less of a lock to make money here. And you also have a lot less in your control. And that kind of has to do with the part of making less money, just because there's less you control compared to DFS. And like, the current problem that I like was running into before Underdog was dropping all these, and DraftKings and drafters were stepping up their game, is like there's no cheap entry available to the masses at all time. This is a very small sport. I think Ian Hartitz tweeted it the other day, but he just says like, what's your preferred form of fantasy football? And I think best ball had 11% of the votes, and there was over 1,000 votes when I looked at it. And so like, that's like kind of my current beef, is just like, hey, like this game needs to grow. And I think like DraftKings, like you're the incentive of the content creator and the like, player in the company were somewhat aligned. It's like, hey, like we want it to grow too. Whereas now, like, now that they're dropping it, I'm happy. But my worry on the content side of it was like, hey, like what are people supposed to do? Because in my mind, you should, if you have $1,000, you should try to draft as many teams as you can with that $1,000, not chase the highest payout possible with that $1,000, just because it's variance riddled and you need more bullets. And I think that one 50 max logic. Like I could win anything if I won 50 max. Obviously not true, but for best ball, I think there's more merit to like, hey, yeah, if I have more teams, I have a better shot of winning.
Yeah, and that's true in DFS also. Like there's some caveats where people are more naturally inclined sometimes to like be better at tournaments or be better at small fields or whatever. But in general, you should be playing as many teams as you can within while taking on as little risk, because the more teams you're playing, you are flattening out your risk. Obviously, if you're a bad player, playing more teams isn't going to make you a winning player. It's going to make you lose. You're just going to lose faster. But like assuming that you are somebody that has a positive expectation, the more teams you get down, you're just getting to your expected edge faster. Whereas, using like best ball as an example, and the reason that I think is just one of the reasons I think it's so difficult to like expect to consistently make money is one NFL season is like playing week 1 NFL DFS. Like, even though obviously it takes longer and it feels longer and everything, it's a 1 game sample size. And so it's already extremely volatile, even on the spectrum of extremely volatile games like DFS. You're like ramping that up even more. And then, like, to your point, if you have $1,000 bankroll, or you say I'm playing $1,000 of best ball this year, if your goal is to maximize your chances of making money, then yeah, you should be spreading that out in like the lowest buy-in tournaments you can. If your goal is to give yourself a chance at $2 million and have a couple teams to have fun sweating, then yeah, like go draft $40, $25 teams or whatever. But yeah, in general, you should be playing like you should be maxing out the lowest buy-ins that you can first.
For what it's worth, Adam, if certain people are watching this, they actually think you're dumb and stupid for that take. That's a hot take, apparently, for what it's worth. I like to believe it's more on the common sense side.
Is king.
Yeah, because there's like bankroll shaming and all that thing, and it's just like, look, like I'm not. Yeah, like, I do best ball content, which in return is gambling content, but like no part of me wants to be the guy that's like, hey, like you should go gamble more of your fucking money, dude. Like that's ridiculous. Try to keep it like, within like what you think it should be, and then operate within those constraints. And I know we're like kind of circling back a little bit here, but I'm very excited to talk to you about like the DFS side of things or just the fantasy industry and your takes.
And I will like add to that the caveat, because like this is a conversation that's gone back in DFS, goes back in DFS too in different ways. It is important. I feel like you always have to have the caveat of like, know what your goals are. Like this, it kind of reminds me of a conversation about live finals in DFS, which for anybody not familiar, you basically can, and I alluded to it earlier with the $1,000 buy-in winner take all NBA qualifiers, but like you have live events where you qualify by winning a qualifier tournament, and then you go to this event and there'll be like 100 people. You have to qualify to get in, and it's like $1 million to first. And obviously, like, you're not going to ever have a 1 in 100 chance to make $1 million at DFS outside of that. But they're like a really big bankroll drain too, because the qualifiers are generally winner take all or very, very close to it. And there's always this conversation around it where it's like, really nobody should be trying to qualify for live finals, because almost nobody has the bankroll to support it, as opposed to playing, more realistic contests. But, and this is something that Jeff Collins has said that I actually agreed with a lot, because he was somebody that chased them a lot. It's about your goals though. Like if you're trying to maximize your chances of successfully grinding out a profit in DFS year over year, yeah, you should, outside of a few people, not be paying attention to live finals, period. But if your goal is to maximize your chances of actually changing your life through DFS, or if your goal is to maximize your entertainment through DFS, live finals are great. Like you should only be playing them. So there's that too, where, and it goes back to what I was saying about best ball. Like if you are just trying within a given NFL season to give yourself a chance to win $2 million and your life is different, then yeah, go play BBM or play the Millie on DraftKings for as many entries as you can reasonably put in, and realize that you're probably going to lose. And, whatever it's entertainment money with the upside of It's like buying $1,000 worth of movie tickets, except if you get really lucky, you get $2 million when you leave the movie. But if your goal is to actually have it be an investment and profit money, then you should just be you should be lowering your risk as much as possible by getting in as many entries as possible. When you play lower dollar buy-ins, in general, you're playing against weaker competition as well. So your expected edge is increasing. So yeah, I mean, it really depends on what your goals are too.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of something that people don't think about a lot. I think if you ask like 100 random best ball players what their goal was, I don't know if they'd have answers. And then, like, I like to think in the DFS world back in the day, like, people would have more answers to that question, but that could be the wrong read. But yeah, I like that take. Just like, know what you want to accomplish, and don't let the timeline kind of dictate what you're going to do. Like, set out your own goal, and whatever that is, you should do it, but don't be influenced by what others are doing. Like what you were saying earlier, I also don't listen to a lot of podcasts and stuff like that either, because I'm also easily influenced and don't want that information in my brain.
Yeah. I hopped on with to draft with Neil yesterday, and like I got in the room as JJ was finishing up his draft, and he's talking about like drafting more Pat Bryant, like I think it was Pat Bryant. And I'm just like, oh, I don't think I've drafted any Pat Bryant. But now, like, should I be drafting Pat Bryant? Like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, this is why I don't watch any of this stuff, because now I'm just like rethinking, 20th round picks or 18th round picks that don't really matter.
Yeah, and then that's also the benefit of like having more teams too, is that you could mix in some Pat Bryant exposure. Whereas if you have 30, your outs become more limited. But I know we're going a little out of order here, but the past, future, present part of DFS is what I'm most excited to talk to you about. We've alluded to a lot of it and touched on a lot of it already, but I guess, just the main question, and you can take this wherever you want to, like, I think you said 2015, 2016, so you've been in the industry about 10 years. What's the biggest difference today in the fantasy industry compared to like 10 years ago? Like, what have you noticed that has changed a lot?
I mean, it's just infinitely more difficult because publicly available tools have changed it so much. Not that I think you can just subscribe to a site and use tools and be a profitable player. Like, obviously you can, it increases your chances, but it raises the floor so much on the lineups that people play. So, back 2015, 2016, like I said, I had an advantage just by sitting in class in law school and thinking about what the best lineup I could play in basketball that night was. And by the time class was over, I had mapped out like basically a set of lineups that I could go home and enter. But back then you're playing against, in an NBA, especially, like, you're playing against people that like aren't even necessarily keeping up to date or fully aware of like what players are even playing that night from an injury standpoint. Whereas, now you can just go into whatever your favorite sim tool is and press 3 buttons, and you're at least getting lineups that probably don't totally suck. You should be doing some other stuff if you actually want to maximize your chances of doing well, but you're playing lineups that at least have a chance by just like clicking a couple buttons for, a couple $100 a month. So when everybody you're playing against, or the vast majority of people you're playing against, are doing that at the very least, it's just going to be so much harder to actually win. Like, your expected return is just going down, even if you are still a good player. And then you combine that with the pool of players in general, specifically outside of NFL. Like NFL, there's still plenty of casual recreational players, but outside of NFL, basketball, baseball, like most people playing at this point are playing semi-seriously. Like, they aren't, especially with sports betting existing now too. Like, you're not getting the guy that just wants $20 of action to have something to sweat, you're not getting a bunch of those guys throwing lineups into like an NBA tournament on a Tuesday. They're just making NBA bets. So like the competition is so much harder now than it used to be.
And you did mention the Sims. I know you, VP run the Sims. As I mentioned, a lot of the best ball audience is like not as familiar with the DFS lingo and just the background. I'm posting it in the chat for everybody here live. If you're listening after, it's runthesims.com. But why don't you go over like what Sims are?
Yeah, I mean, so it's basically just a way to model contests in DFS. So like they became publicly prominent a couple years ago now. But the idea basically is, you've always the transition kind of in DFS is, gone from like your hand building lineups to then you're using optimizers where if you put in your projections, it'll give you the lineup that projects the best. And then you can add in different settings and rules to get lineups that look the way you want. But it's still like it's a static projection. It's not accounting for anything other than your median projection or whatever you put in. To then now we have Sims tools everywhere where, for one, you're able to create lineups that are factoring in your volatility more. So like, from a best ball standpoint, like it would be very difficult to do for best ball, but to use best ball as an example, like when you're building your lineups, you can actually be aware of like Khalil Shakir, his projection is here, but like his best game is here and it's not that high. Or this other player, Travis Hunter, maybe his median projection is similar, but his 75th percentile game is 5 points higher and his 25th percentile game is 5 points lower. You can have like that kind of information as you build your lineups. So you're getting lineups, you can factor in correlation directly. So you're building lineups that inherently make more sense, but then also you're able to say, okay, now I think this player is going to be X percent owned, like within a range, and you can build a set of lineups that are representative of what you think your opponents are going to play. And then you can take the lineups that you built for yourself and just run them against that field of lineups that you think your opponent is likely to play, 100,000 times or whatever. And then say, okay, well, if all these assumptions that you made are correct, these lineups are the ones that give you the best expected return. So it's just another, basically, I mean, they've been sold as like the skeleton key to winning, which they're not, because again, the risk is like you have a very powerful tool now, but it's still relying 100% on your assumptions, and you're making a lot of different assumptions. So if you're not good at making assumptions, you're going to get feedback on how to beat something that is completely irrelevant because it's not what you're playing against. So it's still just basically another data point, but it is a strong data point because you can get, the volatility of your lineups. You can get information on, this lineup makes X amount, but, on average, but again, like in the Shakir example, like, smaller standard deviation. So like it's not winning you a ton usually, but it's also just profiting often. Or, this lineup is basically never profiting, but when it does, you're winning $1 million. Like you can get information like that. It's just more tools that are publicly available that give you a lot more data points to make decisions with, basically.
And, like on that tip, like I wanted to talk to you about, like, how DFS has evolved over the years and like maybe like what edges that you had when you first got into this and drafted out of law school, like were there initially and like weren't there now, and just like how big of an impact do you think that like the launching of these type of tools had on the DFS industry? And I'm sure you're familiar with like, the best ball RTA stuff and, computers drafting teams. That's in, I'm doing hand quotations for anyone like watching only on audio. Like, do you think a similar thing could happen to best ball with like the evolvement of tools?
I don't think best ball can get to the point that DFS did, as far as, again, like it's not that DFS is ruined, but it's much easier to model out a single DFS slate than it is a full season of best ball. Like at Endgame, we've talked about the idea, because it would be fun, of trying to build like a full season best ball sim. But like you think about all the things that would have to go into that. And again, you have to get it relatively correct, because if you don't, you're just getting useless information that at worst is useless, or at best is useless, and at worst is pushing you in wrong directions. But like you have to actually be able to account for how likely is this running back to get hurt at some point. When he gets hurt, what are the percentages that the running back 2 becomes the bell cow? Or what are the percentages that you get a timeshare backfield where nobody really benefits that much? Like, what is the impact of this running back getting hurt on the offense as a whole? And what's that do to the quarterback and the wide receivers? Like, there are so many variables that would have to go into on top of just the normal stuff that is already complicated and complex over a 17-week season. So I don't think you'll get to that point with best ball where you get anything that sophisticated. I kind of, my opinion on the current best ball tools is that it should be a benefit for the industry as a whole, because it should make the casual person more confident in their ability to just, hey, I have an hour here. I want to kill some time. I can draft a pretty good team without having to sit down and do 2 hours of research first. The issue is actually getting that message across, because we saw this in DFS when like optimizers became more prevalent. Optimizers aren't single-handedly winning you anything. They're a very simple tool. But the idea for like the general person is, oh, if people are using this publicly available optimizer, I have no chance if I'm not using it. And basically I'm just playing against computers now, when like that's not the case at all. So it's like the messaging has to kind of work out. But I think the tools that are currently available in best ball now, if messaging were correct, it should just make the casual player more willing to enter the contest and play, because they aren't going to, it's going to kind of, it's guardrails. It's like bowling with bumpers. That's basically, I think, the level of tool that exists in best ball now is just like bumpers and bowling. It's not something that is giving you super sophisticated advice. It's just something saying, hey, like these players are available. You should consider them with this pick because they make sense for your team. And if you're the one drafting, it's like, oh, cool. Like I have that in front of me if I need it. Like I personally don't use any of them because I just kind of like the process of thinking through it all and don't want to be like swayed. But like doing the draft stream with Neil yesterday, he had whichever one of the tools up on the side, and like there were times where, I wouldn't be paying attention. He'd be asking me who I wanted to pick. And I could just quickly look and be like, oh yeah, that seems like a good pick. So like they're helpful in that sense, but I don't think it's anything that's making the game like significantly harder. And it is something that if you message it correctly can actually get more people to play the game.
Yeah, I think the ceiling of like what RTAs or just like tools in general could do for best ball is a lot lower than it is on the DFS side. And like one thing that like I would prefer like to have is like unique combos of like, hey, like 80% of your Chuba Hubbards with Travis Hunter. You should probably, when you take Chuba or Travis, probably start trying to make teams without him. So like that's kind of what I like the future of tools as, is like kind of like helping me live manage that portfolio. Speaking of live, while you were talking, ESPN sources, a Dallas County judge just sentenced Chiefs wide receiver Rashee Rice to 5 years probation and 30 days of jail time that could be served during those 5 years stemming from his role in a multi-car crash in Dallas during the 2024 offseason. Now that the judge has ruled, the NFL can expedite its disciplinary process, and Rice is likely to receive a multi-game suspension. Now, I'm not a suspension expert. I'm going to guess you're not either. And we're both not going to pretend to be one. But like, I guess maybe that he feels live uneducatedly to be out for the whole season. But imagine he falls there, and what you were talking about before too on like all these things that you have to map out. Like, yeah, good luck getting your optimizer. Like your sims for best ball are going to have to calculate Rashee Rice's odds of going to jail, and that's not possible to do.
Yeah, that's not good news for me. I think I have a decent amount of him. Yeah, hopefully it's a few games.
But if anyone here's a lawyer, it'd be helpful if you didn't drop out of law school, obviously, but it just is what it is. But if anyone knows like the legal side of this, but I'm sure someone will post about it later, like feel free to drop that in chat. But yeah, like this can't happen on a DFS slate. Point being, and like there's just
it
a lot
almost
here.
Did last year.
What, Hill?
Yeah, Tyreek Hill got
that's fair
right before the game.
That's fair. You know what? Like, point taken. You were able to take him out at least. You can't take Rashee Rice out of the.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the weirdest. Like, I mean, it's normal, especially if you're somebody that plays NBA DFS too. Like, you're just used to refreshing Twitter, waiting for injury updates. That was a very unique. Okay, he's in handcuffs. What does that mean? I need more information, like, immediately.
Who was the NBA guy a few years ago that he was in jail and they still let him play or something, right? That wasn't Lou Will, was it?
I don't remember that. I mean, the epitome of NBA was, I want to say it was probably 2016 season. Derrick Rose was on the Knicks, and NBA injury reporting is not very good right now. It used to be like non-existent. Derrick Rose is on the Knicks, and they're playing at like 7:00 or whatever. And Derrick Rose was like a semi-popular play in DFS, and then the game starts, and Derrick Rose isn't starting. And it's like, okay, well, nobody reported that. And why isn't Derrick Rose starting? And then reports start coming out of Derrick Rose isn't in the building. Nobody knows where Derrick Rose is. And Derrick Rose had flown to Chicago to like be with his mom for something. Nobody was aware of this. It was not reported at all. And you just have people taking a 0 on Derrick Rose, and he's not even in the same state as the New York Knicks, and nobody had any idea.
Yeah, like just on the bad reporting tip, like there were NHL beat writers that would literally harass the fantasy players and be like, "No, I'm not posting it. Like I know what you want for."
Yeah,
and
the
I'm
Coyotes
not doing
beat
that.
reporter is awful. I remember.
I think that's who I'm thinking of too. I'm blanking on names. I'm pretty sure that's who I'm thinking about. But the Rasheed Rice thing, I think that's a good segue into like best ball stuff. And like I've seen your takes on the timeline at times. Like you seem in and out on your enjoyment of best ball. So this to start, how much best ball do you actually like play? Just terms of total teams. You don't have to give dollar amount.
Yeah, I mean, I usually either max or come close to maxing both of the lotteries, the BBM and the DraftKings Millie. Outside of that, I don't really play too much, but normally, like, because for me, obviously, like, I like the idea of winning one of those tournaments. That would be fun. I enjoy drafting. Like I was talking to you before the show, I wouldn't play best ball if I didn't enjoy the actual process of drafting. I think there's better things that I can do with my money over the course of 5 months than put it into best ball. But I enjoy drafting. And so it's something where, I'll just sit around and draft while I'm watching Netflix or whatever, or sweating DFS games. Like it just gives me something to do. So normally I'll just start around like beginning of July, just kind of drafting on either Underdog or DraftKings. And then kind of by the time it gets close to the season, I'm scrambling a little bit and normally come close to maxing both if I don't fully. So I do that, but like I don't do a lot of best ball outside of that. I generally don't do like week to week best ball. I generally don't do any of the contests other than the main lottos, although I have been kind of pushed in the direction of maybe I should do a couple. Like Eliminator sounds interesting. Rookie sophomore sounds interesting, but like usually I don't do too much, if anything, outside of trying to just max the big ones.
Is it fair to say that, like, obviously you want to win, of course, but that maybe relative to DFS, like the way that you approach best ball, you're not trying to maximize the edge in the same way, because there's a bunch of stuff on the time box contest, like, oh, you're drafting that in July, you should have had 20% of your teams drafted in May, do 10% in June, whatever, and then finish it all out at the end of the season.
Yeah, like my approach is usually I do kind of try and barbell a little bit, but like normally what I'll do, and I haven't done it this year, because I'm not sure if I'm even going to play Underdog yet, and I've done way too much DraftKings than I should have. Normally what I do is I do 50 DraftKings drafts, then I do 100 Underdog drafts, then I do 50 DraftKings drafts, and so then I have like 50 each to do with like a couple weeks to go before the season starts, is normally how I try and get it done. My thinking being that like DraftKings is always softer than Underdog, but especially like I don't have any interest in drafting Underdog in June or July. Like there's just not weak players playing. Whereas on DraftKings, there's always some percentage of weak players. So I always by design start first on DraftKings and then switch over. So normally I do try and do it that way. The difference for me this year is that DraftKings released data through like the end of June on the drafts that had existed. And I found that really, really interesting. And so I'm having a lot of fun drafting on DraftKings, like trying to come up with different strategies that I can use to exploit the data that they released. And then I look down and I'm like, oh, I've drafted 100 DraftKings teams out of my 150, and it's the middle of July. Like this isn't ideal. But at the same time, I'm having fun with it. So I might just be done on DraftKings by the time August starts.
Yeah, that's for on like like the Underdog DraftKings who's sharper tip. Like we don't have to go into this in detail, but like I am somewhat of the opinion that I actually think Underdog has the weakest ADPs, and like maybe not the weakest drafters, but at least on the ADP side. And like I do think there's an element to like, okay, if DraftKings is softer, just say the world that that's true. That also means like sharps like you, maybe myself, other people can kind of build these better teams that when you get to the playoff pods, then it's like a slugfest. And I think people's idea with Underdog is it's going to be a lot more balanced. But my first year playing, I actually didn't even want to play on Underdog because that's where I thought all the sharp drafters was. And then after about the last year or two, I again, opinion more so than fact, of course, I've become the opinion that like, hey, I think the UD lobbies are actually weaker in a sense, but we don't have to go and touch on that in detail. But so you mix platforms.
I can see what you're saying. Like, so I think the way that I would kind of put that in my head is like, if you are like if you're somebody like me who isn't a huge player takes person and isn't spending a bunch of time grinding like player data and really coming up with takes, and you're somebody that is just kind of has a good idea of how to build good teams overall, and then you're just gonna think that you like I would like to think I'm better at building teams in general. I think having a DFS background really helps with that, as opposed to I'm not like a super knowledgeable football like guy or anything. So like from that standpoint, I think DraftKings is easier because you just have more. You have weaker drafters on average. I think that you're just gonna have a higher percentage of your pod just making mistakes and kind of gifting you value. If you're somebody that considers yourself like a ball knower in NFL and you have strong player takes that you have a lot of conviction on, I think you could make the case that underdog would be more favorable because there is probably a lot more consensus on underdog where your biggest best ball influencers are just driving ADP so much. ETR rankings are driving ADP so much that if you think you are better than ETR or whatever influencers, you can kind of just draft the guys that you want at probably some pretty favorable prices and get what you think are really, really good teams. So I do see it from that standpoint where like on DraftKings, you just have so many people doing random stuff that like gets in the way of what you want to do. Whereas on underdog, nobody's really doing anything too random for the most part. You know where guys are going to go. And if you have like player takes that are just not in line with the consensus, I think you can probably draft teams that you think project really, really well that other people aren't. So like I could see that take depending on the type of player you are.
Yeah, I like, I like to think I'm a ball knower, of course, but my like perceived edge that I have, I think, is understanding like the structures and draft capital allotment. And it's something I'm able to do on Underdog much easier than any other platform is kind of be like, hey, only 2 out of 12 of us are going to get through this pod together. Running backs have been scoring way more points recently and passing game numbers are down. I'm going to, spend a lot of my capital on like, these like locked in running backs in these roles. And you're going to have to try to beat me through them getting injured or maybe your spike wings line up. But like, I find it really hard to believe the way that I go about it with the running back prices on Underdog that I'm not going to have, probably a 20 to 25% advance rate. But then that becomes, did I limit myself for the playoff pods? Like, did I give myself enough wide receiver capital to have the ceiling to finish 1 out of 12, 1 out of 16, and then make it to the finals? So like, that's like I would say the downside of the approach that I've been taking. But if you just want to advance, which I don't think that's all you should want to do, there needs to be a balance to it. I think Underdog's just gifting you these running backs that they should not be gifting you at current prices. So like, and you did mention like, the DFS background, I think it gives you an edge on DraftKings or just an edge in general certain ways. Like, can you like kind of elaborate on like what part of your DFS background like that you apply to gain an edge or the edge that you like believe that you're gaining from it?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of like being as experienced with DFS, I think kind of just makes, like, I feel like I think I have a really good feel when I'm drafting for like, even just how I should be handling like different risk profiles and stuff like, and obviously I agree with you on draft capital too, like having, being aware of the teams where I need the extra running back, I need the extra wide receiver, like where I should be allocating my, picks 100 to 120 kind of in that range when nothing looks great like that, obviously, but also just kind of having a pretty good feel for like player standard deviations and how to handle that. And like, there are some teams where, using Travis Hunter again as an example, because like that's kind of been the hot topic. Like there are some teams where I would definitely prefer him compared to other teams where like, let's say I start out running back heavy and I have a stud quarterback and maybe like a stud tight end or something. So like, I know I'm chasing wide receiver. I would love Travis Hunter on a team like that because he's more likely than most of the guys around him to actually be even, again, like you can say that you don't think it's likely and it's probably not, but like he's more likely than a lot of those other guys to like outperform ADP by 3 rounds or 4 rounds. He's also more likely to underperform it. And then you're just weak at wide receiver on that team. But like, somebody like that, gives you a better chance of looking back on that team and being like, oh, this team is a problem because I actually have a wide receiver 1 along with my stud quarterbacks, stud running backs, and stud tight ends. Whereas on a team where I go wide receiver early and I have, 3 really good wide receivers, that Travis Hunter or whatever player you want to use in place of Travis Hunter in this example, the high standard deviation guy, like he's a little bit less valuable because you're still taking on all of that risk. But now the reward is like, obviously, yeah, it would be great if I draft Travis Hunter and he ends up being a wide receiver 1. But all that's happening there at the same time is now I have more weeks where Nico Collins is on my bench or Malik Neighbors is on my bench because that's who Travis Hunter is replacing. So like having just a good feel as I'm going through drafts of kind of, I think, how to handle risk profiling is something that I think I'm good at. And it's just from 10 years of seeing fantasy sports lineups in every sport and every type of contest and everything. And then also I think just sort of a lot of like strategies that I've kind of seen, and again, I don't pay a ton of attention to it. I don't watch a lot of content, but a lot of strategies that I feel like I've seen kind of pushed in best ball are things that like people did in DFS a long time ago and then realized they didn't necessarily need to, or it's just like the idea I don't think is as strong. Like one thing that I've said before a lot of times is people seem like they talk about like the DraftKings Millie Maker, for example, as this like 800,000 entry GPP that they need to win, like the week 1 Millie Maker on DraftKings would be. And it's not. Like when you get to the finals, it's what, 1,000, 2,000 entries or something. It's a relatively small field GPP. And going back to like the Sims conversation, if you sim how to like the best ways to approach tournaments of that size in DFS, like, yeah, you would like to be different somewhere, but for the most part, you're just trying to put the best plays together and hope that things break your way. But like, I feel like I've seen so much, so many talking points about like, sacrificing projection here to be different or hopefully different. And, for the most part, you don't really need to do that. I don't think, in that field size, even though it's a massive field, just because such a high percentage of it is actually a 12-person tournament. So like things like that, the week 17 stacking thing is something that I've always viewed more as like a tiebreaker than a necessity. And that's something else that if you just run DFS sims, which again, like you're able to factor in correlation, it's a factor, but like you're not in DFS, you would never prefer like a $5,000 wide receiver over a $7,000 wide receiver just because it's the run back in your stack. If you have two, assuming that projections are in line with the prices, if you have two 7K wide receivers that project the same, then yeah, you're going to prefer the one that is somewhat, loosely correlated with your stack. But like stuff like that, it's like a lot of ideas that were kind of novel ideas in DFS 5-6 years ago. And then people, to their credit, like they have their good ideas. They have these good ideas, but it's just like, we kind of have done this in a slightly different format and we know the answers already.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the stack kind of being like, a tiebreaker opposed to like what is dictating me. Like, and I think a lot of people will notice if you actually go look at your teams and you don't have like stacks in mind now, obviously quarterback and wide receivers is a little different, but you'll actually naturally stack a lot more than you think you will by even just taking the best players and kind of backpedaling your Travis Hunter thing a little bit. Like, I don't want to argue player takes, but like, it's interesting to hear you say like, hey, if I start running back heavy, I want Travis Hunter because, like the theoretical upside's higher. Whereas like, I probably like 200 drafts in. When I go running back heavy, I'm honestly gravitating more towards like the safer guys in the form of Calvin Ridley and Cortland Sutton. But just on like the Calvin Ridley example specifically, I think his upside's higher than they're giving credit for. Because what if Cam Ward's actually like, a really good NFL quarterback? I mean, Ridley's obviously going to be the number one wide receiver there. So I think for some of the boring picks or like the perceived boring picks, I feel like their ceiling outcome is almost like written off in a way, and it like doesn't exist. And like, he's just going to like maybe be able to pay off ADP. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, is like a lot of these players are capable of being a lot better than I think the general public gets them credit for.
I do agree with that. And I would say that is one thing that has bit me in the past that I'm not good at, is I do tend to like I'm aware, like I think I'm good at being aware in general of like who the more volatile players are, but I do think I also sometimes short sell the guys. Khalil Shakir, and it's funny because like I'll see other people do it, and I'm aware that they're doing it, but then like when I do it, I have a blind spot. But like I saw people talking about Khalil Shakir the other day, where it was just like, they said something like that they weren't drafting him because they don't think he has enough upside. And when I saw them say it, I'm like, you realize how laughable it is to think that you actually can nail down the upside that the Bills' number one receiver has, right? Like there is actually a world where Shakir just like smashes, even though it feels unlikely. But then I also am never drafting Khalil Shakir over the other guys around him because when I have to actually click that button, I'm just like, I don't think the ceiling's really there. So I am with you that I think those guys do kind of get undersold. And I laughed when you said Ridley because I started to use him as the like Travis Hunter counterpoint just because I know he's like right next to him in ADP. But I actually agree with you too that like Calvin Ridley probably has a lot higher ceiling than he gets credit for. So he's not actually like a great counterpoint to Travis Hunter.
And like on the Khalil Shakir one, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about this. Traditional fantasy, you have to start somebody every week. Like you have to make the decision on who's going to be there. And so I think what smash actually means could vary a lot. Like, and let's just say Khalil Shakir scores 100 fantasy points this year, but he scores 20 points each time in each game. Like, and like it ends there. I think that's more valuable than someone who, scored, we'll just say 170, but scored 10 points a game. And I think that's the angle that I am most fascinated with best ball is like, hey, you don't have to start anybody, and the use case for each player is kind of different. Like, do I think Khalil Shakir could be wide receiver 1 overall? No, that's probably insane. And I'm honestly not convinced that he could even pay off. But what I am convinced of is that what Khalil Shakir could bring to me on a weekly basis is enough worth considering him because he's the number one target and, gets peppered by Josh Allen on a high scoring offense. So like, I think there's going to be a lot of lulls for him, of course, but for best ball, like to your, like, I'm focusing on the upside thing. I think people view it as like season long upside. Whereas I'm looking at like, hey, what could you do on a week to week basis? Like, what are you capable of doing there?
Yeah. And I think that comes into play with like running backs too. I actually talked about it with Neil a little bit yesterday. Like there are Austin Eckler was the example that came up with Neil. There are like specific teams where I'm really happy to get Austin Eckler, and then other teams where I'm just like completely uninterested. And like he's one where, like, yeah, if everything breaks perfectly, Brian Robinson gets hurt and Eckler actually is really efficient. Like, yeah, he could, like, he's on a good offense. He could be good, but like realistically, I feel like on teams where I have good. Like I have, McCaffrey and whoever. Like I have 2 good running backs. I don't, or let's say I have like 3 or 4 good running backs.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, let's say I have 3 or 4 good running backs. I don't really like Austin Eckler that much. Like I'd rather roll the dice on somebody like Trey Benson, just off the top of my head around him, where like we don't know what it looks like if James Conner gets hurt and Trey Benson's running back 1. Like maybe he ends up being really, really good. Whereas we kind of I feel like last year wasn't a true ceiling for Eckler, obviously, but like it was a greater than 50th percentile. Like you had Robinson banged up, you had Eckler have a few games where he was the starter, and then he was just involved in general all season long. So we kind of saw what that looked like. Whereas if it's the team where maybe I have McCaffrey and another good running back, but then I only have the 2 running backs when we get to like the Eckler point, I love drafting Eckler because I know he's getting me points every week. Like he's going to be involved. He's going to have plenty of weeks where he just scores 12 fantasy points and he makes up for a down week from McCaffrey or the other running back. So like, that's another, I guess running back is probably even like an even easier example of that, where you have running backs ranked very similarly in ADP, but like the way that they get their value is entirely different. Like some of these guys are going to Zach Charbonnet, like he's one of my favorite guys to draft because he's an absolute monster if Kenneth Walker gets hurt. But if Kenneth Walker plays every game this year, Charbonnet is almost definitely like overpriced. So you have just like these guys that have very, very different like risk profiles.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I like locking in the floor at running back, which I know is somewhat of a hot take because of 0 RB, but I'm also somewhat of the opinion that has that doesn't mean what it used to mean, and I don't know if anyone knows what it really used to mean, but like when I think of 0 running back, I think of 2015, and I think of 10 of the first 12 picks being running backs, and maybe some of those dudes even being 30 years old. Whereas now they're all so spread out because people are wide receiver hungry that it's like, hey, it kind of doesn't make sense to do that. Like, just off the top of my head, like I have Chuba Hubbard ranked 26th overall. No, I never take him there because I don't have to. But in the world where he was going 26th, I would chill out a little bit. But the fact that I could get him at 50 and I have him ranked that high, and I'm above on a lot of running backs for that because they just have the best weekly volume. I think you should lean into that. And then on the flip side of that, on the wide receiver, I'm more open to the ping pong approach because they're the more volatile position. Like if you're getting volume at running back, you're scoring points unless you're fucking Trent Richardson or something. Whereas wide receiver, like even the best guys can have lulls, but also even the worst guys can have ceiling weeks. And so, like, that's kind of like the balance that I go with is, like, I'm more willing to try to play the ping pong variance game that these wide receivers are going to score in, like, the way that I need them to, when I need them to, rather than trying to force all of my capital into there and try to gain the edge there, because there's going to be probably, like, 6 to 8 weeks this year where, like, Justin Jefferson is probably outside of, like, the top 24 wide receivers, which, again, fine, not a problem, does not make him worth the cost. But there's also going to be – there's more weeks where – a wide receiver 3 can be a top 12 wide receiver than there is the running back 3 on a team to be a top 12 running back. And I like playing into that angle, and just Rashid Shaheed's the king of that to me. It's like, what was he going to do on a weekly basis? I don't know, but I know when he does something, he could do a lot. And that matters more to me than his total point projection that he's going to get the whole year.
Yeah. And I do think that that's one of like the more fun talking points in best ball is like everything you just said is true. And I can kind of even make the opposite argument at the same time. Like, I'm not like, I definitely vary my strategy by draft. I'm generally taking like best value I can for most of the draft, and then just adjusting and figuring out what I need on that specific team, as opposed to taking the approach that like I'm just not drafting running backs in the first couple rounds or whatever that I know some people take. But like the counterpoint, while I agree with everything you said, like the counterpoint is, and I'm sure you know this, but like in rounds 14 on, let's say, just picking a number, there are very few wide receivers that in any world are going to have the possible ability to like be a wide receiver 1 at the end of the year. Whereas with running back, because for the exact same reasons you said, where outside of Trent Richardson, like you just need opportunities, there's no shortage of those 14 to 18 round running backs where they need one guy to get hurt over the course of the season in a sport where everybody gets hurt, and they're a top 12 running back potentially. So like that to me is one of the more interesting things with best ball. And it's why I think to a large extent it's a really difficult game to solve, is because of all of the different, like there's a lot of variance obviously over the course of an NFL season, but like there's all different types too, and it has different impacts, and like you really can just take kind of the exact same thought process and say and make like two totally different arguments around it.
Yeah, like I'll even play devil's advocate against like what I said, or at least I think this is devil's advocate. Like in the world, like I have 3 running backs through the first 5 rounds, like a lot, right? But what that does is like I don't necessarily want like the Charbonnet type, that's like, hey, like your path to upside is very clear, because I have those 3 running backs already, and I'm short selling. A lot of time I have 4 volume backs. But on those teams, I'm actually way more willing. Like, yes, I want Jalen Wright on that team. Yes, I want Trey Benson on that team. Austin Eckler's probably not a good example. Khalil Herbert, DJ Giddens, like these guys who like, their path to get there is somewhat muddy, but like the upside is real. And I'd rather have them on teams where I could shield that not working out, like that not happening for me through the other running backs, rather than like what I see a lot happen is like, hey, I'm just going to fire 7 bullets on these guys, because to your point, like after round 13, the running backs absolutely have the highest upside to be a top 24 fantasy player on the year. Whereas like I love Alec Pierce, but there's no way in hell that that's something that's ever going to happen to him. So like that's also like the nuance part of it, of like I could even agree with what I do, but like the way that like you could agree with I do, but the way you approach it like might differ. And I've been trying to like chill out a little bit more at like jamming the volume backs. Is like, hey, if these 3 guys I'm mixing in immediately are better than, or as good as I think they are, it's probably worth like taking the chance on like someone like Jalen Wright, where it's like, hey, you could be a 0. I don't need you to do anything. Like I have no expectations for you. Where I don't like 0 running back is where I have to have expectations for those guys, and I need them to show up for me.
Yeah. I mean, the teams that feel the best are always the ones, especially this year. Like I said, I've only drafted on DraftKings so far, but like my favorite teams by far this season have been the ones where I go quarterback in the like 100 to 140 range and I grab like 3 of them in there. So I have at least one good running back, probably 2. I have a sometimes solid tight end, but if not, I can get tight ends in that range also. And then I have like the good wide receivers. Like the balanced teams, at least on DraftKings, have been my favorite to look at so far, at least. Like they're always the ones where I feel the best about them, just because right now I hate the like 100 to 140-ish range at running back and mostly at wide receiver. And then you just have like all these solid quarterbacks and some decent tight ends. So like that's been my favorite approach so far, is actually like not really going 0 running back. Probably not going as heavy on running back as you, but like still at least drafting 1 or 2 early.
And like kind of like on that tip, like I would love to hear your thoughts on this. My mind, this is just very simple. It's like I could start up to 3 running backs a week, up to 4 wide receivers a week, up to 2 tight ends a week, and only 1 quarterback per week. In my mind, like especially in the world where like I don't have to pick to choose to start these guys, it just happens. Most of my capital should be invested at the positions that I could theoretically start the most of. And from what I have seen from like across all sites, the market has somewhat kind of accepted that, maybe not like knowingly, but the fact that like, you know, all those quarterbacks, I love them too, and those tight ends are all jammed into that one pocket kind of tells me that like the market like maybe has like subconsciously decided that like, yeah, like we should be spending most of our draft capital at the positions that could be the most useful to us on a week-to-week basis. So we could just start more of them.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously that makes a lot of sense. Like the only guys at tight end, for example, that go early are Bowers and McBride, and Kittle, I guess, which is, you know, how it should be. And like quarterback has, I think, dropped off a little bit this year as far as like Hurts and Allen and Burrow still go early, but they aren't getting pushed up the board quite as much as they were last year. I think because we saw, you know, more run heavy offenses last year as a result of changes in defense kind of dictating that. So they're still going early, Daniels too, but like they've been pushed back a little bit. That was one thing that I got burned on it for a couple of reasons, but that was one thing that I tried actually, and it was a way that I think I was trying to be a little bit different. I don't remember if it was last year or the year before. I think it was 2 years ago. I went like really quarterback heavy, trying, like there were some teams, not that I was doing it super often, but there were some teams where I would get like Hurts plus Allen or something like that, with the idea of being able to like ping pong in the playoffs. And, you know, you're going to get, let's say Jalen Hurts is great week 15 or great week 16. He's going to be super high owned in week 17. But if Josh Allen had a down game, now I'm just by myself with Josh Allen in week 17. And that was the year, I think, that like multiple really good quarterbacks got hurt. Like it was a horrible year for quarterback injuries. And then last year, I didn't do it to quite the same extent, but then last year you also just had like, you know, teams running more, which obviously sucked for that strategy. So that was one that I tried that I thought was like kind of interesting, but it also goes to the point too, where, you know, we were talking about it earlier with, you have to remember that each best ball season is a 1-game sample. Like there's still so much like the talking points are still so much like, well, this is what has worked in the past. And it's like, okay, cool. It's worked for, we have 5-6 seasons. You know, even talking about like 0 running back, like your approach is great. If you get a year like last year where none of the big running backs get hurt and you get more, you know, running backs just have more value because passing games aren't doing as well. Obviously, if at this time next year, if, you know, 5 of the top 12 running backs get hurt and all of their backups smash, everybody's gonna be back to just, you should never draft running backs in the first round. Like I feel like, and it's natural. There's so much content around it. You only have so many things to talk about, and it feels like much bigger than a 1-game sample, or, you know, a 6-game sample if you want to take every season. But I feel like with best ball, everything is so like dependent on what happened last year.
Yeah, no, I'm with agreement on you there, and you know, and also on that tip, like I feel like that is true, and I'm somewhat confused, like with that being true, why the running backs are not more expensive this year because of it, and people haven't like corrected that. I texted you at some point last year, and like with like, you know, the rushing numbers and the passing numbers, it's like, hey, this is going towards a run first league, but this will be about the 4th or 5th year of that meta, and I definitely think we're probably due for a change. They always evolve, so this very well could be the last year of like, hey, like how we see NFL offenses operate. But yeah, like there's so many ways to skin this cat, man. I think that's what a lot of people get like kind of like lost on, and like it kind of just leads me back to like I just think you need to attack like draft structures and like what you were saying on QB. I think it's somewhat insane how late some of these QBs go. The fact that, you know, there's maybe like 28, 29 right now that we're probably confident they're going to start 17 games, bearing them getting hurt. And I don't know why someone like Hollywood Brown, who could like maybe have like 2 usable weeks potentially, and like, you know, his floor is very low, and I think the ceiling's pretty capped too, compared to like, you know, Michael Penix and Bryce Young, where it's like they're starting quarterbacks, and like I think their upside could be very high, and their floor is that of a starting NFL quarterback that could be useful for you. So like in my world, I don't think a starting quarterback should go after like 150. I think Aaron Rodgers should go after about 150.
That makes sense. And to me, it's also like it's not just that there's a bunch of quarterbacks in like, again, that range that I love is like 120 to 140 or 150. It's the teams that they're on. Like Justin Herbert, obviously good quarterback, like not a runner really, but very good quarterback on an offense that could be good. Like, yeah, they'll be run heavy, but he's good. Drake May, chance to be like a legitimately good quarterback. You have CJ Stroud, sucked last year, but like it's the Texans quarterback. They have all the potential to, you know, be a bounce back offense. You have Jordan Love with Green Bay, like probably a very good offense. It's not even like you're talking about quarterbacks here that like haven't had success in the past, or you don't know who they're throwing to, or like they have unappealing wide receiver options. Like you just have quarterback after quarterback after quarterback that like are on good offenses with good players.
And, you know, we're reaching about like the 1 hour, 15-minute mark. You know, we'll shut this down about 15. We'll do some closing statement here in a minute. But one thing before we end like the best ball talk that I want to get the DFS players' opinion on is what are your thoughts about Anthony Richardson? Because the upside there is obviously very high. Now, before the shoulder injury, I was a lot more bullish. I had like 35%. At this point, I know he's not going anywhere, so I'm getting that exposure down a little bit before like, you know, deciding to re-up. But in terms of like, hey, if you're chasing upside, like I don't remember who tweeted the Travis Hunter thing, but it was like, well, okay, we're playing for top, like, you know, top outcomes here, like to actually win, not to like have content. I was like, well, okay. In that world, I think Anthony Richardson fits that same mold. He's been a top 5 quarterback in 35% of his starts. But I'll quit rambling about AR. I would love to hear your thoughts on the theoretical upside that he brings.
They're in line with you. I think I have 15 to 20% right now. I love just getting him as like my QB3 because he's going so late that there's no real downside on teams where like I'm not chasing running back or wide receiver. You know, I didn't get screwed out of like 3 picks that I wanted, and I'm just trying to make up for it now in round 18. Like he clearly has the easiest path to being like a week in, week out guy that is starting on your best ball teams than anybody else you're taking in the 18th round. So yeah, I'm there. Like I'm getting him a decent. And the other thing is you obviously don't need to stack him. So it's not like you need to have planned for this to be an Anthony Richardson team. Like, oh, oh shit, he's there, but I didn't grab Michael Pittman. Who cares? Yeah, he's just such an easy click on the teams where, you know, you're not forced, you're not chasing points at other positions. And the other thing, so I actually compared him on Twitter to like a better version of the Jameis Winston decision last year. I had some Jameis last year. I didn't have a ton, but I thought Jameis was like a super interesting, at least theoretical thing to talk about last year, where you have all these question marks around Deshaun Watson that have to do with his health and his ability to play football anymore. And then you have Jameis, who you know the Browns would rather not have to go to because it means that Deshaun Watson isn't working out. But if he plays, like he's going to produce fantasy points and he's going to be unowned or very low owned, whereas like Richardson's at least popular. But like the difference, like if Jameis is starting, like he's a solid quarterback. If Richardson is starting, like you said, he's a QB1 from a fantasy standpoint, if he is starting.
He went the 5th round last year.
Right. And then also the slight difference is, and I've seen this kind of talked about, but I have a really hard time buying into it. I can't imagine the Colts want Daniel Jones to win that competition. I have no idea like what the reasoning for that would be. There's no logical argument in my mind that the Colts would want anything other than Anthony Richardson to show up, be healthy, impress, and take that job. Whereas, again, with like the Jameis comp, the Browns wanted nothing more than Deshaun Watson to show up, impress, and stop being a talking point. So like, yeah, I mean, I think Richardson should be going. Obviously, there's huge risk, especially with the injury. So like, I don't think he should be going before, like Darnold or Rodgers, probably. But like, I don't know why he's going close to pick 200 on DraftKings either. Like, it's just such, from a risk reward standpoint, it is so heavily skewed in favor of the reward, because the risk is what he doesn't play and you take a 0 on your 18th round pick, just like you're going to when you click most 18th round picks.
Yeah, and if you have 3 quarterbacks as well, then it's like there's really no risk. And also on like, the 200 tip, the difference between like actual draft capital value between pick 150 and pick 200, it's minuscule. It just feels different because like, one's 150 and one's 200.
Right.
But in terms of actual value of that pick, they're minimal and like difference. So like for that reason, just like for the upside that he brings to the table, and I kind of set you up. I figured you'd agree with me being a DFS guy. So thank you for giving that to me. But yeah, like if we're chasing upside here, I don't know what I'm missing on Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, it's I was getting him, like I said, I have a lot. I kind of go back and forth where it's like, do I really want him on like every team? But also like I can make the argument that you should just be drafting him every single time you can.
Before the shoulder injury, the dopamine rush I got from clicking him was awesome. Like that's because that's how I feel. Like there's a vibe meter. Like, does a guy feel good to click? Like I like to think that matters. If like every time you click somebody it feels gross, maybe that's not the guy for you. But
Right.
I know we segued around here a lot. I want to wrap this up for that hour and a half. DFS Pro, very very busy man. My just like kind of like final thought for you, or question for you, and we could get out of here, is just like, we talked about the past of the DFS industry, fantasy industry, the present, like, and that's been 10 years running now. Do you have any thoughts on like what this landscape's going to look like 10 years from now and how it's going to evolve like on a year-to-year basis?
I think, and I've said this for a couple of years, and hopefully it comes to fruition because I think it'll be fun. I think ultimately, and it is dependent on the legal landscape, obviously, in the sense of like it all has to stay legal, period. But right now it's being prevented because in a lot of states it's not legal yet. But I think ultimately you get to a point where there's like an overlap of sports betting and DFS, where it's basically like peer-to-peer sports betting, and the site takes a rake as opposed to you betting against the house. So like, instead of you making a 7-leg parlay, you have, like, in my mind, it's kind of like you have DraftKings style DFS contests, but it's with like prices as opposed to, with like lines, as opposed to individual players with
Poly market, kind of like what Poly market and
yeah, sort of like
doing.
So I'm not super familiar with prediction markets, but I do think like same general direction, where your longer shot prop, for example, if it hits, like, yeah, you get a lot of points for that, but obviously you get 0 if it doesn't, and you can put that in your lineup or not, and kind of like change the entire risk profile of your lineup, depending on the type of contest you're playing. Like, to me, there's just like, so I would assume that if they can, that's where it gets to, because like it's good for the sites, because now they're not taking on any risk. You're back to the DFS standpoint for them, where they just have to exist and they're making money. They're not getting, beat for $1 million because the Super Bowl doesn't go their way. So they're not taking on as much risk. They're just churning money constantly, the same way they are in DFS. It's more fun for the average player, because while I enjoy DFS, I will admit that projections and all of that stuff and everything that goes into DFS is not the most exciting or enjoyable thing. Whereas people enjoy a lot more, I think, the idea of just saying like, I think DK Metcalf scores 2 touchdowns today, and that's going to be something I put in my lineup. So I think it's just something that like it checks all the boxes as far as being fun for the average player, being something that I would think sites would be very interested in having. So I think that if it kind of gets opened up everywhere, it's where things go. Emerald said, sounds like pick 6 before they ruined it. Yeah. So I had pick 6 for like 5 days, going back to the legality thing. It opened in Maryland. I had long enough to look at it and say like, okay, this looks like an interesting enough game that I should probably set some time aside and figure out how to play it. And then Maryland was like, nope, you can't do this. So you need it to like get legalized everywhere for it to take off. But I think you go that route, and then I think even, and I know this kind of exists in like some crypto backed arenas already, but like again, just like kind of more of like a peer to peer marketplace where I can post Saints minus 150, and if you want it, you can take it, and DraftKings just takes a cut for letting me post it, as opposed to DraftKings being the one putting that you're betting against directly.
Like I trust your read on that way more than mine, but I am familiar with like the prediction market thing a little bit more than you are. It seems like, it sounds like, but in that like same sense, I think that's where that's going to, where it's more so like peer to peer, and then somebody's there taking a cut out of it rather than like us versus books. And I do think like that probably does work out better for everybody in the long run, and just in terms of like where things are going to be in 10 years. Like I can't pretend to know because mostly because of legal things, but I don't see people stopping gambling.
No,
anytime soon.
I mean, yeah, that one's going to be hard to put back in the bottle, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think you can obviously make cases for or against, like, if lawmakers could go back 10 years, would they have opened that box or not? I think there's probably arguments for and against, but I don't really know how you go back at this point.
And just like final question, we'll get out of here. Just like, rapid fire for you, well, just one. If you were, a casual getting into sports betting, you were looking at DFS and like, let's just say like pick'ems, parlays, would you recommend the person like getting into the like, sports gambling scene? Do you think they're better off trying to be a DFS player, or trying to like, maybe do like 5 or 6 leg parlays with like, somewhere between like a 30 to 150x payout?
Try and get into it as in like make it a legitimate way to make money, or try to get into it as in like entertainment and
they want to win. This person wants to win. Like I don't know how much of their net worth they're risking, but they're getting into it with the idea that they could win some money doing it.
Yeah, probably betting. I mean, I think that I'm blanking on the phrase, but I think it's very difficult. Like if you're talking to somebody that's just like they know sports, but they don't have any sort of background in like gambling or DFS in general. Like I think the barrier to entry is very, very high for DFS these days. Like to even be outside of micro stakes stuff that like advanced players can't play in for the most part. To be competitive and just kind of understand what you're doing, I think is very, very difficult. Like it's just such a competitive landscape now, as opposed to betting. Like I think in a lot of different ways, just probably better off with betting.
Yeah, I learned. My buddy comes over sometimes, tries to get me to bet on WB. Use Prize Picks. I didn't know they referred to their like how long the odds are on a parlay, not in the actual odds, but they call it like demon time and super demon time and shit like that. So in terms of like the casual bettor being informed, it definitely seems like sites are taking measures to make sure they learn as little as possible. But,
yeah.
All right, brother. I think
somebody in chat said DFS is a lot more fun than betting. Like I agree. I don't think that's the common take though, because like DFS, you don't even know what you're rooting for most of the time. Like you want your guys to do well, obviously, but like there's so many times in DFS where like I'm rooting for this MMA guy to win their fight or lose their fight, or I'm rooting for so-and-so to score a touchdown. And at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, wow, I got 5th place, but I would have gotten first if that guy that I spent all day rooting to score a touchdown didn't score a touchdown. Like whereas with betting, you know exactly what you're rooting for. You can turn on a game and like, you're just rooting for Terry McLaurin to catch 5 passes. And, you're not rooting for yourself while rooting against 1,000 other people. Like, I think I enjoy DFS more, but it's a lot because of like the puzzle angle of it, and I enjoy the process of actually playing. Whereas I think if you're somebody that doesn't appreciate that, like I can't imagine betting not being more fun.
Yeah, and it's also like on like the DFS side, like maybe user experience thing not being as fun, like at least for like the parlay, like if like all your dudes hit, like you do win, but like in DFS there's worlds where like, hey, you actually like nailed every single guy, but you didn't nail it well enough, and then now you're 35th and not first place, and what, 2x 3x maybe depending on the contest. But All right, brother. Thank you for coming. I think this was fun. I hope you had a good time. I want to give you the opportunity in the last like a couple minutes here. Just anything you want to plug to the people?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Endgame Syndicate YouTube channel. I do some daily content over there. We have some best ball content over there as well. That's the company with Yuta, Brick75, Nerdy Tanner, and myself, Davis Maddock. So check that out. Check out that channel. Pretty good content over there.
I'm dropping that in chat for everyone here. You just go. I'm just dropping your Twitter, but if you want to follow Adam, you can find all of that there. Again, brother, thanks you for coming. I had a good time. Everybody who showed up, thanks for hanging out and listening. I hope there was something of value you took away from here. I'm Big Love. This is Adam, and we're out of here. Peace, guys.